Hello, everybody. Welcome to the Premier League check-in podcast with myself, Benjamin Bloom, and the great Matt SB. We're going to be looking down at the bottom of the table and then some of our EFL alumni up there in the fight for places in Europe. Matt, there's going to be a big focus on Wolves versus Ipswich in the relegation sandwich today. That feels where we're at with it. But I want to start just one place higher. Are you happy with my premise that we probably never need to mention West Ham because they have a 10-point buffer? But I'm just going to raise not even the lightest of red flags, just on the potential that they've got 1 point in 4 and they've got games coming up against Leicester, Everton and Wolves. And I think we're honestly at the point they would have to lose all 3 of those games to those teams for us to be able to mention them maybe with a slightly more red flag. But are you happy with that assessment of West Ham as we start the relegation conversation?
I think so. Yeah, I think when we touched on Everton, who we have had in this discussion a couple of weeks ago,
where have they gone?
They've disappeared. I think they were on 26 points a week or two ago, and we said, I think that's it now. They've gone on to pick up 4 points just to make themselves even more safe if they weren't already. So we're now left with West Ham as the team above this bottom 4, but they're on 27, Ben, and even a 6-point gap feels quite insurmountable for some of the teams down here. So for West Ham to have a gap of 10 points over that bottom 3, I think realistically we can draw a line because the games are running out. What I will say to those people that would like to say it's mathematically possible they could be pulled down, we will cross that bridge if we get to it. If we find Ipswich win a couple games and West Ham keep losing and the gap does narrow to, I don't know, let's say 6 points, then maybe we can have a little bit more of a look at it. But at this point in time, their points per game has got them well clear of what we think you're going to need to survive this season.
And with my Ipswich hat on, which we'll come to, Ipswich play West Ham at home on the last day of the season. I'm kind of hoping West Ham are well and truly on the beach for that one rather than down there. But so let's move down one place to Wolves. Now, this is really interesting, Wolves, because I've got the table up there and I can see. In fact, let's put the table up on the screen for the viewers today. He says, "How do I do that?" That's how I do that. So you can see a whole load of red and defeats for Wolves. 4 defeats in 5, Matt. But Matheus Cunha has scored in his past 3 games, and we're very closely correlating Cunha's form with Wolves' ability to survive. We think they're very closely linked, don't we? Also, and I was listening to Jamie Carragher, who I think is a great pundit, but can be a bit Liverpool-centric. He was very complimentary of Wolves yesterday in their game against Liverpool, where they took them right to the distance, didn't they? The issue I've got, Matt, with Wolves, yes, we're going to talk about Ipswich having made a point up on them yesterday in terms of big picture. We've got this fixture situation where they have all the hard teams and then purportedly all the easier teams. So from the start of March, they basically play the entire bottom 9. They can't play themselves and they don't play Palace. But they play Everton, Southampton, Leicester, Ipswich, and we have to include Spurs and Man United because they're easier games than others. So even though Wolves are essentially a point closer to the bottom 3, I think there's potential good signs.
There is, yeah. We highlighted the fixtures. That's definitely worth looking at, especially in the Premier League, where you get a run of horrible games where you can predict a team won't get many points, and they're pretty much at the end of that horrible run now. And they've found themselves still above the bottom 3. I think when we spoke about this run of fixtures back at the start of January, we said, can Wolves just keep within touching distance of what Ipswich and Leicester get up to while Wolves go through these difficult games? Well, they've got through it, still above the bottom 3. So as you say, the path is now opening up, and it does feel as though I mean, look at those fixtures there, Ben. There's plenty of ones, especially at home. You've got Southampton in there as well, where they'll be looking to tick them off. I mean, there's a big one there that we do need to circle between Ipswich and Wolves. And for Ipswich, it's about keeping Wolves within touching distance for that game. But
And could that be the end of the road fixture, that one, April 5th? People are going to be looking at that. If Wolves go to Ipswich and win, can they finish them off at that point?
Yeah, they could do. They really could. For Ipswich, like I say, I think you've got to keep them within touching distance and then win that game. Really got to win that game because we'll come on to Ipswich in a second, where Ben raised a good point before we started recording about picking up points where you least expect them, but you do have to get points where you are expected to, if that makes sense. But it does feel, though, Ben, that we are just keeping this conversation going until Wolves, possibly get away from this. If you see what I mean, if Wolves go and string 3 wins together, I'm not saying that's definitely going to happen, but it really kills this conversation. So it's Wolves' flat line at the minute, which is keeping this going, because Ipswich and Leicester really haven't capitalised. So if you're a Wolves fan, you've got through the difficult games, put up a good fight against Liverpool as well, to be honest. Cunha scores and, nearly got something out of that. And to be honest, coming into this weekend, if you'd have offered a Wolves fan that all 3 wouldn't win, knowing the fixtures, they'd have probably taken it. And that's what they've got.
Yeah. And annoyingly and boringly and tediously, Matt and my conversation will be then moving towards, if Wolves do just move in a nice pace, we're going to be moving towards this idea of the 17 teams for the 4th consecutive season, which would be 8 consecutive transfer windows. And you worry about, that it is literally now just Wolves having a horrible season that is keeping it alive for the 3 EFL promoted teams. And if West Ham is normal, then the 3 EFL teams everyone would say they're cooked now. They'd be 10 points behind, but they're not. So let's talk about them. So Ipswich, and I spoke about this on the Blue Monday podcast, so I'll let Matt take the lead on this. My issue is that from the point Axel Tuanzebe got red carded, a draw is then an amazing result. Okay. So Ipswich get that draw. Liam Delap now has double figures of goals. That's great. The new keeper who you saw at Coventry the other week, Matt, he had a complete worldy, ridiculous game. So you get one of these games where you have a heroic draw where the odds are massively stacked against you. When you go down to 10 men away at Villa, you should lose there, shouldn't you? And they didn't. So that's great. My issue is that doesn't keep you up. Heroic draws don't keep you up. Heroic draws are amazing, Matt, if you then follow them up with victories in, quote, winnable games. And I don't know whether Tottenham and Man United are now, quote, winnable games. They're coming up. You've already mentioned the game against Wolves at the start of April, Matt. But my issue is, for any Ipswich fans getting, quote, carried away, that, yes, it's a great performance and to get that draw. And you couldn't have done much more, but it's not enough, is my issue there. And, yes, on this weekend, as you just said, you would have expected 0, 0, 0, 0 in all of those games. And Ipswich got 1. So Ipswich basically win the weekend, don't they? And they move above Leicester. But do you take my point that it doesn't matter, especially when you've lost at home to Everton, you've lost at home to Southampton, and what was the big late draw against Leicester?
Yeah, it's a single point that they've gained on everyone down here, and in a sense, it's a baby step. But then when you look at it in the big picture, that we're going to be below a point per game to stay up this season, it is a big step, really, isn't it? If you gain 1 point, a lot of the time teams are losing down at the bottom. I agree with your point. I mean, before the game, I thought if Ipswich get a draw, decent result, especially then, like you say, going down to 10 men, keeper plays really well. But what I like is once they went down to 10 men, Ben, they still had the bravery to go forwards. And that's obviously how they got themselves in front, because you'd have worried if Villa had scored the first goal after Ipswich being down to 10, it could have gone a different direction. So credit to McKenna. I think that they still posed a threat and they kept Villa on their toes. But the keeper, like you say, who came in for the Coventry game and has established himself now, did a very good job, made some good saves. And defensively, they kept their shape and kept some concentration. And like I say, gained. And, as an Ipswich fan, you'll see Leicester lost. You'll see Wolves lost. And it is a point made up on the rest. But you're right, if you go and lose the Wolves game, it's kind of all for nothing. You look at the fixtures now, Ben, because we spoke about Wolves' fixtures. I think between now and the international break in March, it looks like the fixtures are slightly more favourable to Wolves. They've got Everton, Southampton in there. They've got Bournemouth and Fulham who are decent, but Ipswich have a couple of tricky games. It's interesting this, though, isn't it, with Ipswich's fixtures? Because I mean, Villa are better than Spurs and Man United. That's what the table will tell you this season. They are more of a solid top team, whereas Spurs and Man United, you sense you could get at them. I mean, Ipswich took 4 points off Spurs and Man United in the earlier games this season. So if you can pick off one more win in those next two, you close the gap. But that's what it's going to come down to now, Ben. You've got to get wins to go with those draws, because I am worried about a Wolves back-to-back wins coming out of nowhere and leaving the rest behind. Because as a neutral, obviously I know Ben's an Ipswich fan, but even as a neutral, I want to see a competitive edge. You want to see championship teams being able to go toe-to-toe. And even if we could just get into a position where Ipswich are within 2 points of them going into the final game or two, that'd be great. It'd give us something to get excited about. But it's just about staying within touching distance. And you just worry about Wolves' fixtures opening up here. But Ipswich, you've got to take the positives. It's a decent draw, but it's got to be built upon, as you say.
Yeah, I totally agree. And it feels like, I don't know, I feel you'd rather have it the other way round, that you had the possible, quote, winnable games now rather than in that last five. Because you're right, Matt, it's just a complete damp squib, isn't it? Those, if you get a 7 or 8 point gap, then the teams in the bottom three feel, well, it's done, and that psychologically affects them. Also affects the next rung of teams, because they're like, okay, we're safe, we can ease off a little bit, and then all you get is all the teams at the top beat all the teams at the bottom, and it's just a little bit rubbish, like you say, for the end of the season. But let's hope it goes further than that. I mean, maybe we're being a bit unfair here to Leicester, categorising it with just Ipswich and Wolves, because literally Leicester could win the next game and go above Wolves. So, apologies to Leicester fans. We'll try and reframe the conversation that way. They took Arsenal to the last 10 minutes. Remember, Arsenal really struggling playing a midfielder up top, who then turned out to score a couple of goals at the end there. So they've dropped below Ipswich, but again, they've ticked off a fixture against a team that's, like a guaranteed 0 points, you also think. 9 defeats in 10, Matt, and they've conceded 2 or more in all of the defeats. So this is the problem when you're analysing Leicester, that the trend maybe for Ipswich is just, I mean, we're talking about C- and C+ or something here, is just slightly different. But they're still in the fight. And like you say, random back-to-back wins this season could just blow the whole thing into smithereens, couldn't it?
Yeah, exactly that. I remember an analogy you used once or twice before in the championship relegation battles. You said it's like tortoise racing, where you might have a little scuttle forwards, and it really does open things up. The thing is, with Leicester City, when I watched them, and you look at the results as well, you struggle to see them staying up looking at those two big things, because the results are not great. Performance-wise, I don't think they're great. I really don't know what their identity is under Ruud van Nistelrooy. I know they changed the manager, hoping for better. But the thing is, they had that random win against Spurs where we kind of didn't expect it away from home, and it really changed things. So one game does change things. They could perform terribly for 90% of their fixtures remaining. But if they can just win the odd one here and there, it might still get them out of this. So it's results now. I mean, especially at this end of the season, Ben, it's results over performances. So you look at those 4 games, Ben, they could lose 2 of them horribly. But if they could just sneak 4 points in 2 of those games, it could make a massive difference down there. So just got to get what they can, especially at home. But even their home form's not good at the moment, Ben. I mean, conceding loads of goals right now. Goal difference wise, I think that's something we could look at a bit more now as well, Ben, because Wolves' goal difference looks significantly better than Ipswich and Leicester's, and they've got through the horrible games as well. That's where Wolves' goal difference could have gone down a peg or two. So if it's to come down to that, Wolves have the advantage there as well. Desperately close still, though. Leicester in a similar boat to Ipswich, where they're losing or drawing the odd result, but if everyone else isn't moving, you've still got a chance. It's weird, isn't it? You've got to try and keep yourself positive and optimistic, even though the results are negative, if that makes sense.
Makes absolute sense. Finally, Southampton, they followed up that win at Ipswich, which just is going to be like no help to anybody, frankly, that one now, because Southampton are obviously still 10 points adrift. I said before that game, is Southampton going, look, we take you with us, and that could turn out to be that way because, yeah, if you stuck that 3 points onto Ipswich, we would have, butterfly effect and all that. The Villa game might have been totally different, but yeah, if you stick the 3 points on, which isn't the cleverest thing to do, but Ipswich would be outside of the bottom three. So Southampton lost 3-1 to Bournemouth. And Matt, I always find 2-0 down at home at half time a bit of I find that a difficult one. It's a hard one when you're a home fan and you've got that. And it was like 16 minutes, wasn't it, where Christie had played brilliantly and got the first 2 goals there. 10 defeats in 12 for Southampton. And you fear for those Southampton fans that having beaten Ipswich, that's your lot, guys, and you're going to go on another losing streak now, which really sucks.
It does. It's been a difficult season to draw positives and give Southampton credit. We're not being mean, Southampton fans. I think you'll agree with us. There's been marginal improvements maybe under Juric in spells of games. I've touched on this where, they're maybe scoring a little bit more than they did under Russell Martin. But as you say, to be 2-0 down at home at half-time, a long way back, isn't it? I mean, obviously, I rate Bournemouth. I thought Bournemouth would win that game. But you've got to, every game's a cup final down at the bottom. But I'd have maybe thought another way the Southampton fans could look at this. We're at home. It's a local derby. Let's really get up for it on the back of beating Ipswich. Let's really try and stick in the game until the end. But like you say, to be 2-0 down at half-time, it was always a long way back.
To be fair, it was a couple of real bits of quality there's a brilliant cross and then a long-range strike, isn't it? And you're kind of like, oh, wow, Premier League, we're 2-0 down. We've barely conceded any possession or territory. We're 2-0 down. Yeah,
exactly that. It's the most unforgiving league. I mean, you could play well and lose, obviously, down at the bottom. But you look at the fixtures, I was about to say, for Southampton, and they're not particularly nice. They have got a game just before the international break, Ben, against Wolves, where they are at home. If they were to win that, obviously, they make up 3 points on the team that's 17th. But they've got to get points in games we don't expect them to for them to be taken seriously, Ben, because 10 points adrift at this stage, and it only takes one of them. It only takes one of Ipswich, Leicester, and Wolves to stick back-to-back wins, and Southampton could be 15, 16 points adrift, and that is definitely game over. The games are running out. Just got to get wins wherever they can find them. Draws. That's another thing we could say for Southampton. Draws are no good for them now. It has to be wins, but I don't see them coming.
No, and I think you and I both agree that kind of like league table based punditry misses a lot of information, doesn't it? But the league table can be revealing. And like, if you'd not watched 1 second of football, you looked at that league table and said, who is objectively by far the worst team in the league on like every metric that the league table gives you. And that's before you get into all the underlying, shot data and possession stuff and all of your XGs and that, you would have a fairly obvious notion that Southampton are by far the worst team in the league, which is not a nice thing to say, but unfortunately we're trying to tell the truth here. Get your thoughts in via the comments on the relegation scrap. Are Southampton objectively the worst team in the league? Are we being unfair on Leicester, categorising this all just about Ipswich and Wolves? Can Ipswich get past Wolves? And are we going to get the very, very boring Wolves this wouldn't even be regressing to the mean, progress to the mean.
Yeah.
Go from being terrible to being normal, and the whole thing's done. And will I ever mention West Ham in these shows ever again? Get your answers to all of them on a postcard in the comments. Let's go to Matt's moment and our EFL alumni, all occupying places in this 3rd place to 9th place kind of European scrap. We won't mention Brighton and Brentford this week, guys, although we do understand they're EFL alumni. And we don't quite class Newcastle because Matt and I weren't YouTubing back that far. But who do you want to talk about here, Matt? We've got Forest. They're holding in 3rd, but they lost to Fulham. They've lost back-to-back away games, although last time they lost back-to-back away games, I think they won the next 4, which I know will be the response from Forest fans, understandably. Bournemouth are up to 5th and 1 point behind Manchester City, who had a really good win against Newcastle, didn't they? Fulham, we've obviously kind of hinted at there. They've gone past Villa. I guess Villa are the big losers, considering you've got a home game against Ipswich. You would expect to win it, and they haven't won in 4. So, talk to me about our EFL alumni, Matt.
Yeah, Ben, we need to talk about this race for Europe. It's wide open. I can't believe it. I mean, we're at this stage of the season and there's still so many teams that could finish in that top 4, top 5. And another thing I'll mention, Ben, is I think at this point it's looking very likely that 5th is going to get Champions League based on how the English teams are performing in Europe this season. That's going to be credited to the English League, and we'll get an extra Champions League place, which opens the door. And look at the teams that are involved in this race, Ben. It's like a packet of Revels. You're not sure what you're going to get here. You've got some teams that you just expect to be up there, but because of the underperformance of Manchester United and Tottenham, it's really opened the door for overperforming teams that have come up from the Championship or been in the Premier League for just a couple of years. And I really don't know where to start with this. I think what we can establish, Ben, is Liverpool and Arsenal are in a title race. If that is still on, I'm not sure. But I mean, Liverpool have got their own fixtures that are difficult, and if they slip up, Arsenal might pursue them.
I will say, Matt, just quickly, Liverpool yesterday looked like a team that were heavy title favourites. You know, when the games start to get hard, and even beating Wolves, who are down in the bottom 4. You know what it's like, and promotion teams, like we've studied in the EFL, and Daniel Farker saying it last year, winning in the last 6 games is so hard. They did have that look about them yesterday, but that may mean nothing.
They have got some interesting games coming, Ben. If I just pick them up, obviously they're still playing in the Champions League and got the Carabao Cup final coming, but they've got Villa, Man City, and Newcastle in the next 3, which should make things interesting. But yeah, Liverpool and Arsenal will park them to the side. It's from Nottingham Forest down to, well, I don't know where, Ben. Maybe Aston Villa or Brighton. Are Brentford out of it? Maybe. Depends if you're looking at the Europa League battle, which might be 6th and 7th places. We'll start with Nottingham Forest then, Ben, because Nottingham Forest, I was daring to fantasise that they're in the title race a few weeks ago when they had that home game against Liverpool. The form has obviously wobbled. 2 wins in 5 isn't title form, but let's be honest, top 5 would be an incredible achievement for Forest, and it's looking very likely. But they lost to Fulham, and Fulham are another team in this mix, Ben. So has the door opened up for anyone to get in there? I mean, Man City, are they back on their feet? Newcastle United obviously lost to them 4-0. I'm struggling to pick teams that are going to finish 3rd, 4th, and 5th, Ben. I'm leaning towards Forest. I'm leaning towards Man City, and I really don't know. I mean, Bournemouth, consistent. We touched on them beating Southampton earlier. What's your take on this race for Europe, Ben? Could we have 2 or even 3 surprise packages in there?
I don't want to rain on your strawberries here, Matt, but we're talking after Newcastle have lost 3 in 4 and Chelsea have lost 2 in 3 as well. So we have to factor in that we might, if you're tracking the rolling points per game, that probably both of those clubs are at a lowish point that's going to go up towards the end of the season. However, you know, Forest have got that 4-point advantage. Forest got a 6-point advantage over Newcastle with 13 games to play. They need to stop losing away games, obviously. And it was maybe we can just put that Bournemouth 5-0 in the outlier pot for Forest, because obviously you were present as they bounced back and won 7-0, didn't they? But, you know, you get to the point where you're Forest, and they are having an amazing season, but where you're going to Fulham and it's like, well, okay, this is a game, you know, you probably need to leverage and get something from, even if it's a draw. Because I think they lost I think Fulham might be Forest's kryptonite this season. I think they might have beaten them twice. So it's difficult to imagine that one or other, Man City, Chelsea, Newcastle, Villa, you would say are the established order. I know Villa are one of our EFL alumni as such, but, you know, they're a kind of fake EFL alumni because it's such a big club over such a long time. So when you're talking about 2 or 3, I struggle to get past 2. Do you see where I'm coming from?
Yeah, I do. I think Forest, are in such a good position now. As you say, 6 points ahead of Newcastle. And the reason this is getting quite exciting now, Ben, is the games are starting to run out. You know, we're 2/3 of the way through the season now, 65% of the way through. So these teams are here for a reason. Even if Nottingham Forest win, lose, win, lose, win, lose, win, lose, that might still ride them out into about 4th or 5th place. I know it's not quite the standards they have been setting in the earlier part of the season, but dreadful against Bournemouth, battered 5-0. Nuno got the reaction. They beat Brighton 7-0. Lost to Fulham. I would say they were quite well beaten. I think Fulham played very well, and Fulham are another team in this discussion. But with Nuno being such a good manager, I think he'll get a reaction from Forest, and they might bounce back in the next game. So I could see them being a bit spotty, winning, losing, and that might just hold them in there. I do think Man City are starting to find their feet again, and they'll at least think they've got to make sure they finish top 5. The title's gone for them, but if they can maybe win a cup and secure top 5, that'll be them salvaging their season. The thing is, Ben, AFC Bournemouth, they're 5 points clear of Villa. They're in a stronger position, surely. I mean, Bournemouth are bashing out a lot of points. Villa dropping points where you'd least expect, and then also you've got to factor in Villa still going in the Champions League. I mean, do you see Villa overtaking Bournemouth here, Ben?
So it's interesting you mentioned cups, because Villa have struggled to manage the balance between Champions League and Premier League. I would also throw in the FA Cup as it pertains to Nottingham Forest as well, because surely if you're having such a great season and you're Forest, and I said to you, you're going to completely fall off a cliff in the Premier League, you're going to finish 7th. But I guarantee you're in the FA Cup final, and you got one game for a trophy, and you got a trip to Wembley. You and I were both there last time Forest were at Wembley, and we saw the sea of red. Well, you were in it, weren't you? I was in the Huddersfield end, actually. So
I was in the Huddersfield end as well.
You were in the Huddersfield end as well. You saw it as well as I did, didn't you? But I just wonder, if I'm a Forest fan, I'm taking that deal. One game to win the FA Cup and have a major trophy. I know football's about money and Champions League and all of that now, but the trophy, and Brian Clough never even won the FA Cup with Forest, got to the final, didn't he? So I don't know whether that becomes a slight distraction as well. And someone like Bournemouth, who, Man City are going to have Europe, Chelsea are going to have Europe, although Chelsea changed their entire team and play every Thursday, don't they? So maybe it's, although you're still taking all the staff out and planning and traveling and logistics and all of that once every midweek, and you'd assume Chelsea will get right to the end in that. So, yeah, maybe that looks nice for Bournemouth if they're just going to play once a week. And also the thing with Bournemouth, they've had bad injuries. So each and every week, there's going to be someone coming back out into team training onto the grass. That's going to be a bonus for them. So, I don't know. What's your take? Did you disagree about my FA Cup argument? You'd rather be Champions League football in 2025?
It's difficult, isn't it? And maybe we should put it to the Forest fans in the comments. I think the position they're in now, Ben, if they don't finish top 5, they'd see it as quite, I don't know, is it an underperformance? It'd be quite the fall off, I guess. But one
game from a trophy, Matt.
Oh, yeah. It's a good question. We'll put it to the Forest fans. We'll see what they have to say on that. But do you know what? It's a really good point you mentioned the FA Cup, because we don't touch on it much. But of
course, Ipswich are going to beat Forest in the next round, so it's all irrelevant.
That's it. But with Liverpool, Chelsea, Arsenal, I think Spurs all eliminated, the FA Cup's really open this year. I mean, Bournemouth, they've got Wolves at home. Bournemouth could maybe fancy their chances at getting to a final, depending on how the draw plays
that's out. That's a good point. If I'm rolling that argument out for Forest, I've got to roll it out for Bournemouth as well then.
Yeah, so it'd be interesting. I mean, we could find that this European race goes right to the wire, but maybe one of them gets quite far in the FA Cup and possibly drops away. But it could also keep the momentum going. The final conclusion on this, Ben, is it's wide open, and I'm fascinated to see how it goes, because you've got the teams you'd expect to be there playing catch up at the minute. Villa, Brighton, I guess, and Newcastle and Chelsea both outside the top 5. Fulham are right in the mix as well. So it's wide open, isn't it? I mean, be difficult to guess. I mean, I suppose you'd put Man City in there just given the power that they've got. But we'll have to track this until the end of the season.
Can I throw this in there as my worst case scenario? And there's no offense to any of these sides because they're all great clubs. Can you imagine the top 4 is Liverpool, Arsenal, Man City, and Chelsea, and then Man City win the FA Cup. How boring would that be?
Oh dear. Yeah. Could see it
You
going
could
that
see
way.
that happening, though, couldn't you?
Oh, don't, Ben, don't. But like I say, I think given how open it's been so far this season and knowing that we should get a fifth Champions League place, surely, as a minimum, we should at least get one team in there that we didn't expect. And then we're not even mentioning the Europa League. We might get one or two surprise teams end up there. So I'll put that to the viewers. Who's going to finish in the European places? Let us know in the comments.
And yeah, cast it back to those three teams coming up in whatever year it was, Fulham, Bournemouth and Forest, and they have all done incredibly. And the fact that we're sat here just a few seasons later talking about them all being a chase for Europe is just absolutely brilliant. Thank you, everybody, for joining us here on the Premier League Check-In podcast. I'll be back over on Matt SB's channel doing the League One predictions at some point this week. Will come out at the back end of this week. Matt, what else is going on over on Matt SB?
Lots of predictions. Like I say, Premier League, Championship, and League One. We've got it all. Coventry City are worth keeping an eye on at the moment. We are flying up the Championship table. I will be at Coventry City versus Preston this weekend, so feel free to come over to the channel, check out the vlogs and the predictions videos where you can see a bit more of myself and Benjamin Bloom.
Yeah, brilliant stuff. Thank you for all of the support, and we will be back next week with another Premier League Check-In podcast.